Hi everyone, welcome to today's presentation. Today I'm going to cover with you some of the power modeled data and how we can identify areas of unique athlete physiology. And we're also going to cover some of the strategies on how to best use this as part of an ongoing training strategy, targeting and tracking, and also going to explore with you some of the possibilities of this with some of the current data that's available. So just going to tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Richard Rollinson. I'm the owner of CPT Cycling Coaching. So as well as being an ABCC and Training Peaks Level 2 coach, I'm a regular contributor to Cycling Plus magazine and also one of the key testers as part of the WKO Future Works group. So we're going to dive into the first slide. So athlete physiology then. So online training and coaching for cycling endurance sports is now commonplace and it's a great way to plan and track your progress. However, there are some more powerful additional tools that are not always used. So with basic endurance software, that can help to plan, track and monitor your training. But we could dive deeper into that with athlete physiology through more advanced software with big data metrics. We mainly do that through power modeling. And there are some additional sensors that can be used as well. But this can give us quite a good extra insight into the unique characteristics of individual athletes that just that basic training load planning and tracking doesn't always take into account. So today we're going to aim to cover how to identify key physiological differences and what action to take in a training strategy, what to do differently, and to target some customized improvements as well. So that's just going to really, some of the metrics we're going to go through are going to really show you how to identify those and then how to use them in part of your training plan, whether you're a self-coached athlete or a coach yourself. So we'll aim to cover certain lab metrics that can be modeled, and although they're not totally as accurate as using those metrics in a lab, they are accurate enough to be highly usable, and they are trackable on just about every uploaded ride. So that's the main advantage you've got of that, rather than being in the lab every few months. You can track it more regularly. I've tested a lot of these metrics myself with the WKO power duration curve model metrics. I've had lab tests back from athletes around the same period of time, and they do match very closely. So we're going to have a look through WKO software today. So there are other software out there for identifying unique physiology. WKO is not alone in that. So you can, there's other options out there, like there's Golden Cheetah, there's Instinct as well. So you might have heard Dr. Collins say all models are wrong. But I'm definitely a firm believer in some of those models with power and other metrics are more useful than others. So it's a case of sort of finding your own way and testing out your own theories to find what works best for you. And some models are more usable than others to you personally and how you work. It's just a case of finding that and trying and testing different software. And concluding on what works best for you and still keep refining that as well. So of course, one of those includes FTP and how that's modeled. We'll get to that very soon. There are also other metrics outside of this software as well. Instinct is a good one there for pulling in lab metrics as well. So you can use those alongside what you normally track too. So yeah, and then once you find what is more usable for you, you can then use it to action your training prescription a lot better from that. So yeah, physiology is complex. Damn it. So half stole one of Dr. Coggan's sayings from that with I think it was it's an aerobic sport, damn it. So this is going, it was sort of exploring here how you know, a lot of people want the training prescription process to be very simple, and it's not. Hence the damn it part where people want it to be so simple. So I've just stolen this quote here. Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple. So that's Steve Jobs that said that. So of course, you know from what work he's done, how you know you can make something very usable and simplify something very complex, and it can make it more usable. And that usable thing being your training prescription and your tracking on what's been completed. So the complex thing really is more referring to all those different layers of physiology and capturing that. So you've got more areas to work on. So yeah, many athletes and coaches want it to be simpler, but it's not always the case. And there's no getting around that fact that everything is underlyingly complex. You choose to accept that or not accept that. If you do accept that, then you've got far more ways that you can see to make improvements on. And if you don't consider that, then you can miss large, often key areas of certain energy. And not looking at that can make you think that you're making a lot more progress than what you actually are. By missing those areas, say for instance, if you only track FTP and you're targeting a criterion, which is similar sort of length to an FTP type duration, then all that hard FTP work that you have done could be undone if you don't have the ability to follow accelerations, if you're not training those accelerations. So also as well, make sure that you test on a regular basis. If you don't do that, you're also using a bit more of, let's say, a historical FTP, something that's where your form has kind of escaped from if you haven't been training that regular and you haven't been pushing your maximum in recent weeks. Then those targets are not going to be as effective in your training because they're not then based on your current form. So that can then lead to not sustainable training work in what you're doing at the moment, because you can just end up working too hard and then not recover enough. So at the end of the day, it's your legs that do the talking, and if the more truthful you are with yourself, and the more areas you work to identify to work on that can be quite complex and look at them without bias, then your legs are then going to start doing the talking a lot more. And by taking that bias out, you're not thinking, oh, I'm further ahead than what I actually am. So you're less likely to miss those areas. Right, so yeah, form your own opinion. So think of the following opinions in this presentation, and also the data sets we're going to look at, some of the charts we're going to cover. Think of them as tools in a toolbox, and like tools in a toolbox, they're all different. So you might, if you don't need to use a hammer, then don't use one. But sometimes you might, a screwdriver will work, because you then need a different data set to identify something that you're looking to track. But then likewise, if you're trying to think of a tool to use, then it's probably not going to be a useful insight for you to see. So by that, what I mean is it's more effective to seek out a solution than to try and track something that you try and track something you have a theory or feeling on, and you want either validated, or if you want to bust that myth and think, is what I'm training on is I've got this sort of feeling. You might already have one data set, but then when you're looking to the next data set, so say for instance you're starting training with power, you might be looking for another way to track what energy you've got within that power. Then you start to look to heart rate, to muscle oxygen, and all sorts of other metrics. Just start with that question first. That's all I'll say with that. So always aim for the starting point to be that question, and then work back from there. So try not to start out with the data as your starting point. Don't take, say, heart rate and go, I've already got power. What do I need heart rate for? Those questions that you should be asking. Okay, right, I've started with power. I want to then see what is the aerobic impact of that effort. If you're looking at it that way, you will find more and more useful insight, and that will get you into something that's a bit more usefully actionable. And so today's discussion is just my opinion based on what I have experienced. So a lot of these methods, these ways of identifying physiology and then using that in a plan, I've seen real results with it. If you try the same thing, it might take you a little while to use what's here and then refine it yourself to make it work a bit better for you. But yeah, it's just based off what I've experienced with trained prescription, with what I've seen work with coached athletes, with myself using these philosophies. So yeah, the areas of physiology to cover that some of the main areas of physiology that WKO, power duration curve modeled, power will identify. So at the top there we've got Pmax. So this is a sprint one. So this is the maximum sprint power that you can produce through a single total pedal revolution of both legs. So it's not peak 1 second power. It's not total power for one side and then the other. It's for both. And so that is what, it doesn't completely define what maximum power is, but it's I find the most relevant way of capturing that, really. FRC, so this stands for functional reserve capacity. This is the amount of accumulated energy that can be achieved over FTP without recovery. So this is measured in kilojoules. So of course you need power for this. So basically you've got accumulated amount of power. So with that 1 kilojoule of energy, so that's 1,000 watts accumulated. However many times you accumulate 1,000 watts is what you can do over FTP, over your power threshold. And then when you get to zero, you either need to come back up again and recover, or you hit that zero and you can go even deeper than that. That's the point where you go over and above where your current power duration curve is. So if you do see that number go into minus figures, then you are making a maximal improvement. And our VO2 max, so as some of you will know, is the maximum rate of oxygen consumption an athlete can achieve, which has been used, of course, for a very, very long time. Power at VO2 max can also be identified. So you need accurate and also regular weight to put in there to get that regular VO2 max number, that 40, 50, 60, whatever it is. Power at VO2 max can be very useful as well. Right, so FTP, now this sometimes gets misinterpreted, misused in some cases. Right, so according to Coggan, who, of course, invented FTP, this is the highest power the rider can maintain in a quasi-steady state without fatiguing. It is not, by definition, your peak 1 hour power, which does often get misquoted. So it can be your peak 1 hour power. It can be that by accident almost. It can also be around about your peak 40 minutes or your peak 45 minutes or your peak 55 minutes. But we'll get on to that a little bit more. We can more relevantly identify that, and I'll show you a few ways to do that. But this is, note that definition. It is an actual physiological changing thing that happens there, which may not always happen at peak 1 hour power. Not necessarily. Right, and then we've got stamina. So stamina, this is a really good metric for monitoring where your power duration curve is when you're going longer than FTP. So that, what it measures is the rate of your power duration curve drop. And this is measured in a percentage. So you'll see where your FTP is, and then your power duration curve will tilt up or down. We'll go through a couple of slides in a minute that will show that. So it will show you how much your power duration curve tilts downwards after that, which inevitably it does, of course, because you're going into longer power durations. But with these advanced big data metrics through power modeling, we can gain some extra insight into the unique physiology of the individual athlete. So gives us a good initial indication of where the athlete is in those identified areas at any one point in time. So we'll aim to cover those unique physiological differences to other athletes as well. And then what action we can take in a training strategy and use those to customize targets and make, you know, potentially those improvements. So there are different ways to estimate FTP. The most commonly used is the 20 minutes test minus the 5%. So the WKO power duration curve model 1 goes beyond that. So there's not just that one peak power that's being used. There's many different peak powers around FTP, not just around FTP, that influences that as well. So the 20-minute test, that type of testing is usable, and it can normally estimate your power for around 40 to 60 minutes. So it's taking that 20 minutes and then minusing the 5%, and it's, I mean, all FTP is estimated. So some estimations are more accurate and relevant than others. But what you see with the WKO model FTP and coming up, it uncovers some other areas of complexity that you won't see within the peak 20 minutes. So yeah, we'll get on to that. So finding FTP's duration. So we just mentioned there that the peak 40 to 60 minutes can be estimated. So that estimation can be anywhere between 40 and 60 minutes. What is more relevant with the WKO model is it's going to show you, it's going to estimate where within that 40 to 60 minutes is. But it's also going to show you that there's other areas outside of that. So normally it's from about anything from around 30 minutes with the WKO5 model. I've seen anything up to about an hour and 5. Used to be about an hour and 10 with the WKO4 model, but the WKO5 model has been refined a little bit more. So it's a little bit more relevant. But we'll get to that in a minute when we see how that sort of raw mean max power is some of that noise is eliminated there. So it's some of the targets are a bit more relevant. So like I mentioned just before, so the quasi steady state power without fatiguing, where that occurs that is where the FTP duration is. So that's what we're going to try and more pinpointly estimate in a moment from a couple of these charts coming up. So I'm going to get to that now with this power duration curve. So you'll see here, so we have just a basic power duration curve here. And we've got in that white, you'll see this is the raw mean max power. So we've got a last 90 days date range here. And that's what these metrics are normally modeled off. You can use your discretion here you can use shorter durations like that. So say last 30 days, if the athlete had a period of sickness or injury. Most of the time, the 90 days model is the most relevant. As I said before, Dr. Cobham quoted that all models are wrong. There is no right or wrong. There's no black and white in the actual physiology that's going on where 90 days is the absolute current form. So that's where you've got to kind of use your discretion to see where those lines are blurred. So, your current form, it could be a few days shorter or longer than that. It sort of fades in and out of that last 90 days, but that is generally tends to be the most relevant one there. And that sort of trained power you've got available in your legs. I mean, you can't always tap into that. Your short-term form can go up and down on any given day. So it's not like you absolutely have that peak power available right at that point because you've done it in the last 90 days. But it gives you a good indication of what is possible coming up, but it's no predictor. So you see here with the vertical line there, that's TTE. That's your FTP duration. That is estimated. And so you can see here it's estimated around 50 minutes. So although it is an estimation, we now sort of know in this case that it's around 50 minutes. It's not anywhere between 40 and 60 minutes. So we've just narrowed down that FTP duration a whole lot more relevantly because we're not 15 minutes either side of it, somewhere in between. We've got a much better idea of where it is. And we can see this the rate of how this power duration curve here kicks down straight. Whereas although we're trending down through here on these shorter FTP durations, you can sort of see it almost starts to flatten off, and then it sort of doesn't dive off a cliff, but it heads down a little bit more. And that's where that physiological quasi-steady state maximum before fatiguing, that's around about where that happens. So that's what gives us a lot more relevance, really. I mean, you could be using the same, I could say accuracy, but you could be using the same power meter. But then that's not what we're using. You could be using different FTP tests and ways to estimate that. So it is the more relevant estimate. So you see where that mean max power is. We can see how much that curve smooths that out, so it eliminates a bit of noise. So even if your mean max power is slightly higher or slightly lower, it's giving you a more relevant way of seeing where all your current maximum powers are and what we're estimating from these additional metrics from that. So so first thing then, we've identified FTP. That's our process in identifying that. So then we sort of want to have a look at all those other areas of physiology and start to cover those. So aside from physiological areas that we've covered, there's a more all-encompassing view of the athlete's physiology, not just through what we've got here, which is a training peak to power profile, which is a very useful tool. We can see we've got the athlete's power in watts per kg, and we're then directly comparing them to a data set of all sorts of ability levels of cyclists. And we're comparing that for 5 seconds peak, 1 minute, 5 minutes peak power, 20 minutes, and also 60 minutes as well. So, I mean, there's various comparisons on power duration curves. So the starting point in identifying an athlete's strengths and limiters can be with that power duration profile. And yes, that compares everything from like a beginner to a world-class athlete, and compares that athlete's power profile. Normally you can see that on 90 days range. You could use that as well on a season review if you wanted to. And what the difference with the WKO system is that it shows you that same data set. It will still show you your peak, your comparison, your peak 5 seconds, minute, all those ones there, but it will show you it through every single power duration. So you get a much more broader 360-degree view of where the athlete's physiology really lies, and not just sort of those 5 snapshots, which can be really useful, but then this one that gives you a greater degree of relevance again. So I'll come to that on one of the slides coming up. So profiling physiology. So what I mean by profiling, it's that series of identifying where the athlete currently is. So alongside those other comparisons that we made there, with that whole, you had the power profile there, and also with the curve, you can also profile Pmax, FRC, and FTP. So the athletes' numbers in those areas against other cyclists, and you can see what sort of a range they are in comparison. We've also got something called the WAC score chart. It stands for William Allen Coggan, who created it. And this gives an ability score out of 100. And I find this particularly useful when comparing for different ages. I work with a lot of master cyclists. So often I get the question, okay, I'm there in comparison to others, but you know, what about comparing myself to others from similar age group? So it just gives you those tools that I mentioned there. So that curve, the FRC, Pmax, FTP comparison, and the WAC score chart. You can work with all of those tools to give you greater identification of strengths and limiters more clearly. So this is the dashboard I'm talking about. So we can use that to establish areas to work on. So we have the power profile comparison chart I was talking about here. So you can see when we just go back to the previous slide we had there with the power profile there. So you can see on this one that you've got like world class up here, fair, moderate, cat 4, cat 1 up there. So you see those lines there. We've still got those when you go over to this power profile, power duration curve. So you can see there, this particular athlete here was circled in green where the stronger areas are for this athlete. So up around the sprint, some of the shorter FTP durations, a lot of the VO2 max type durations there as well. And we can sort of see how from these higher lines, we've dropped away a little bit through this area here. And that's more so around that longer sprint duration, sort of 20 seconds into more of the anaerobic type durations. So up to around a minute. And then also we can see just after around that, where that was TT, we identified that sort of starts to drop away there. But we do tend to slide down a little bit from there, which is normal for most road cyclists, at least most amateur road cyclists. If you saw along the more longer road race pro cyclists, they would have a lot less drop off in their stamina there. So that's why that data set through there, in the comparison data set, not that athlete there, that's not tending not to drop away as much. So yeah, so these tools here, they will help you identify which areas to work on, such as those strengths and limiters that we've got circled there. So if the desired outcome is to improve those limiting areas, then certainly work on that in most cases, with the longer sprints and the anaerobic durations that we've just identified. You can prescribe more training in that area, as well as the stamina one that we just mentioned on that far right. So you can work on that more, but then also as well, we'll get to event profiling. We'll touch on that a little bit later, and you can use that to sort of blend. You might have a particular limiting area, but then you might identify that that's not really needed as much for the event that you want to target. You'll still need to work on it, but we'll get to that just a little bit later. So we can see down the bottom there, we've got those comparison scores I was mentioning there with the Pmax. So this athlete is sort of into that medium to high range there. FRC, they're around about in the middle there. So that's about this particular athlete. They're around 16 kilojoules FRC. So you sort of get to that sort of 1600 watts accumulated, and then that athlete would need to replenish their recovery or go even deeper than they've gone before, certainly in the recent 90 days anyway. And we're in around about the middle of the range there for FTP. So so what to apply differently. So we're taking those metrics we've just identified there. So now what do we do with it? And this is about incorporating, so we identified in the, say for instance, one of the less strong areas, so the longer sprint and the anaerobic. So we identified we wanted to train that more. So this part of the process is then, how much more do we train it? Do we increase the amount of workouts that we do targeting that? So how frequent is that? When in the year is that? The duration, so the length of efforts, the length of the workout. Also, what sort of intensity is it? Is it maximal? Is it submaximal? You want to test these areas by going maximal through all of these power duration areas, but also as well as part of an ongoing, more sustainable training plan. If you train maximal all the time, you're just going to burn yourself out and not be able to build week on week, month on month. And then it's where you fit recovery into that as well. So there's many different areas to focus on with those, and it's finding that balance. And like I said on one of the first slides, it is complex. There's no one simple answer. So you've got to dig deep and use these tools in the toolbox to find more of those answers. Like I said right at the start of the presentation there. So we're talking about there, started to touch on the intensity, also the length of some of those intervals as well. So with that FTP being more relevant in the WKM model, and this can help you to target different things at different areas of physiology. So taking FTP, so you can do one of two ways with that. You can do all sorts of other things, but you can work on either extending that TTE time. So say, for instance, you've got a very short FTP, very short TTE, say it's around 30 minutes. And say, for instance, you particularly want to work on like a 25-mile time trial. Sort of a classic around 1 hour effort. Then you both identified the event you're targeting and the limiting area of physiology. You would then want to work extending that current power at FTP. The most useful thing would then be to extend that power. So I have done a whole blog on this, which you can zap the QR code on that and give you a little bit more information. Save the link to that blog. So I go into a little bit more detail on that with how to set some of those targets as well. So just getting back to this PD curve again. So this is just showing you basically the different ways to target that FTP and two different ways of training strategy, really. So you see the green arrow there. That's basically showing you can take that TTE number, so in this case 50 minutes, and you can work on increasing that power. So you can train submaximally at that power duration at around about 50 minutes to get yourself used to that type of power just below the maximum. And you can then directly target your testing so that you're directly working on more power than that. And then you can also do what we just mentioned before, which is extending that same power. So that's going to lengthen that TTE. So both ways can help you to improve TTE, and using a mix of both is always the most effective strategy. What I've found, and you might find different, but I've always, I've used this system for probably well over 5 years now, and then that's what I've always found most effective. If you lengthen TTE out, then yes, your FTP power might not go up, but then you're sort of improving kind of the stamina side of FTP a little bit more. And then by doing that, if your FTP on those shorter durations stays roughly around the same, you're not gonna need that much more power from where you have been at a much longer duration to then increase that power shorter. So they kind of work with each other quite well. So this chart here goes a little bit more onto some of the targeting that I just mentioned. So this is a chart here that I've created. I've stole some bits of other people, some bits I've added myself, and this is what I generally tend to use for more individualized targets. So we're talking beyond just targeting an area of physiology and going, okay, we're going to target a certain percentage of FTP, which is great for around FTP, no problem with that. You can use it for other power durations, but it's not going to be as relevant. So instead of, say, around anaerobic, we're going to say target 150% of FTP. And this athlete might be, as we just identified before, stronger or less strong in that particular area compared to their FTP. So that's not taking that into account if you just use percentage of FTP to prescribe. So what I tend to do is here, I tend to get one area of physiology. So say, for instance, here, label this as FRC. You could label it as anaerobic as well. And you note here, I've labeled that either intensive or extensive. So these tend to be more regular targets. You'll see on that blog that I tend to go more into the maximal testing targets as well. And what I tend to use is there's your curve there that you've done in the last 90 days, and you'll note this one up here says test, and then that's a percentage over your curve that I've found most people can realistically get to above the curve. Doesn't always work. I used to have it at a different percentage, and I've refined it a little bit more because I found one of that target tended to be a bit too much to step up to. It's still just a guide for the athlete to go to. You've got to use your feeling as well. But yeah, that tends to work most of the time. You can adjust it for different athletes. That percentage figure might not always work for any one athlete at any point in time, depending on where their form is, depending on the type of athlete they are, and what type of physiology you're testing as well. So yes, so we've got FRC. So the intensive target there, you'll see is the shorter one. So that's where we're trying to take that area of physiology and try and increase the power. The extensive target, the longer one, you can see we're trying to work on that same area of physiology, but then we're trying to work on extending that power out. But this is just for submaximal. So we've got two curves under a curve here. So again, this is a percentage of the power duration curve, not the percentage of FTP, that goes under the curve within a range, within a submaximal range, which is one that I've found works most of the time for most athletes. Again, it can be tweaked as well, depending on the athlete and where their form is currently at. But yeah, then I mean, we're not going maximal at that point, but you're getting the athlete used to getting close to maximal at one area of that physiology or the other. Like there's one for P max, because we're tending to not work within a range with that one as much. We've got max aerobic, which is VO2 max related. So those two, they're using WKO optimized intervals, which is a chart and a dashboard where there are some of those unique targets there that relate to the PD curve, which is WKO, are the ones that made that one. So you can also, for that max aerobic target, you can also identify where your power at VO2 max is. Have a look at that. There is another chart that I'll come to in a minute that shows that. And then from that, you can see where that is on the power duration curve, and then you can slide with this chart. You can slide your cursor along, and for any given power duration, it will give you that submax range, or it will give you a test target to work on. So the FTP extensive one there, that one in the light blue, that uses TTE, and all the other ones in there, all those other targets, they use the zone edge, so the WKO eye level. It will use the high edge. We'll take the power at, say, with these stamina targets, we've got one where we've got an intensive and an extensive one. I made those basically, I mean, you can target this any way you want, but this is just the way that I've done it in this case. So you can target sort of the edge of like a zone 2, zone 3 eye level power. You can take that power, scroll it over the curve, or in this case, the line does it for you, and then identify where the power is and what sort of power to target from that. And then that can help you you can sort of see where that light blue, that TTE, that FTP extensive, where that drop off is. It can help you to work on building up your power, your submaximal power, at those FTP, those durations longer than FTP. Right, so next is another sort of training strategy, tracking power peaks. So we can see some power peaks below. This is just every ride. I've selected 3 different peak power, and I've tried to do on each different area of physiology. So we've got VO2 max there, we've got FTP peaks there, and we've got stamina peaks there. And there's also another couple in there. So there's one for FRC, one for sprint as well. So the VO2 ones there, we've just selected a peak 7 minutes, 5 minutes, and 3 minutes. Likewise, we've done the same with the FTP 60, 40, and 20. So what we're tracking here, these lines, these horizontal lines, they're showing where the top 5 of each occur within this selected date range. So we've got a season review one here. We've got a season date range. You can select any date range you like within WKO. You can use this. I use this most of the time with the last 90 days to see what form this athlete's in. So in this particular case, we've got a cluster of form around here. So we can see that sometime between May and July, so in that June sort of time, there was actually a peak of training that was targeted around that time for this particular athlete. So we can see these tend to cluster up. So we've got sort of 3 of those top 5, most of those are sort of occurring there, and similar patterns happening with the other 2. So we know that we're building not just the training volume, the prescription of that unique physiology. We kind of know then that it's working when it's needed to work. And this is great when you're doing a season review, and we can see what's working and not, and use that to plan the following season. There's a little bit of hindsight in that. So where this is quite useful is then that action of what do we do next. So you might have a standard regular training plan for a certain event, which might not always work for the individual athlete, because we might look at all those targets that we were looking at in the previous slide. We just get to that there. Looking at those areas of physiology, and then we're tracking how well is that power improving, not just at the absolute best, but just below it as well. So how much form are we building on working on those areas of your power duration curve? So if there's a particular area lacking, so say for instance, there's a bit of downtime here and a bit of post-season there, but you can sort of see VO2 max in this case hasn't been trained as recently as some of the FTP duration. So if we look at a standard training plan and there wasn't really much max aerobic VO2 max work planned in there, then we could look to add more of it, because that athlete is lacking a bit more in that area. You notice they're a little bit difficult to read. That's just taking those areas of those peak powers, and then we just listed what is the percentage difference just on that bottom right hand corner there. What's the difference between that top 5 and what the absolute best is? So if you're sort of scoring the difference between all of the top 5 and the absolute best, if that's sort of like quite low, like below sort of 80%, you're going to need a bigger jump in order to get yourself to improve that maximum. It's going to be, maybe 30% more that you need to do from what you've done recently, which you're less likely to achieve. It's doable, but you're less likely to achieve it compared to if you that top 5 is say 95, 96, 7 or 99%, you're very, very close to then improving your overall power duration curve and your maximum power. So it sort of shows you by training close to that maximum, you're far more likely to make that smaller jump up than a much bigger one. So let's get back to this comparison chart again. So I'll just put this up just to give you an idea of, it's good to make those comparisons, but I do recommend that you don't do it all of the time, or certainly don't make those comparisons with other athletes all the time with the athlete that you're coaching, or if you're self-coached with yourself. So I recommend sort of looking at it a bit less regularly, so a mid or end of season review, something like that, when you're sort of gathering your goals for the coming season, and you're sort of reviewing what areas do we really need to work on for the next training plan. When you're looking back on a chart like that, comparing that athlete's power to what power they've done themselves, you then know that the actual athlete's progress, how much they're working on that particular area of physiology, and comparing themselves to what they've done previously or recently. That's the most useful way of tracking improvement then. And it's a lot more motivating as well, knowing that's the progress you've made, rather than thinking, oh, that's still a limiting area. So yeah, that can help a lot with motivation. Certainly what I've found from what I've worked with. So then we can track this further. So we've got historical Pmax and FRC here. So those sort of snapshot in time, like we had the overall in that previous comparison, say for instance, Pmax, sorry, and we had that, what it was for the last 90 days or what it currently is. This will show you day to day how it's moved. So you're kind of seeing where those strengths and limiters in the power duration curve, where they're occurring a little bit more. So it just gives you another insight. It's another tool in the toolbox. And then we've got that one. We've also got the same for historical VO2 max and FTP. So that just gives you a little bit more insight there. Particularly useful is showing FTP as a percentage of VO2 max. So if that number is starting to get towards about 85%, then you probably need to start working on your VO2 max a little bit more. Otherwise, VO2 max is going to limit how much development you can make on FTP. You know, if the two numbers are so close together, then you're less likely to improve that longer power duration. If that shorter power duration isn't trained as much or isn't as high, if it's a more of a limiting area. So it's not just one limiting area to work on one limiting area. It's the limiting area can be a limit to other areas of physiology as well. So phenotyping. So again, this is one of these things, it's not super duper pinpoint accurate, but it's a very, very useful tool in the toolbox again. So we've kind of taken that power duration curve, we've identified all these different areas of physiology. And then what we see here on the left-hand side, so we've got a charted phenotype. So you can see this on the top hero bar in WK at any one point in time. So that just sort of gives you a ratio of one axis is between Pmax to FRC and then relationship to FRC to FTP. And so it kind of plots where the athlete is to these different phenotypes. And you can sort of see here how close they are or not as well. And you can track how that moves through time. So, I mean, one very useful thing with that, with seeing where the balance of the power duration curve is with that, you can see if they're more of a sprinter, pursuiter, all-rounder, or time trialer. Now that's more of a guide rather than a suggestion to what event to target. So, you know, you might not be a time trial racer, you might just be very good at steady state power more than you are at sprinting. So that can be tracked over time. You know, the more data you feed it, the more accurate and relevant it is. So it's very possible to see where an athlete naturally sits. You know, some things are genetic, some things are trained. So you can see what is normally a known strength. You know, that could be, again, like what I said at the start, it might be a feeling that you have that this might be a strength. And then that strength might not have been trained very well recently, but you or the athlete might be thinking, well, I think this is a bit more of a strength that you have. You can track that through time. You can go to an all-time date range and see, okay, right, yeah, I can see you're far more through time. You're more of an all-rounder, even though recently it's saying you're a sprinter. And this chart on the right-hand side, that will give you an all-time history of that. So again, it's something else in the toolbox to better identify what type of rider this is. And if that is a strength and it hasn't been trained recently, it helps you to identify that and to put some of that training back in there. So you're not losing those areas. You could be not making use of a strength that you really need to on a goal event, and it helps you to spot that. And then we've also got estimated muscle fiber type there as well. So that's sort of helping you to see if it's more sort of fast or slow twitch fibers. Again, we're not doing muscle biopsies or anything like that, and we're not pretending it's that accurate, but it just helps you to sort of see where the balance in that power duration curve is, and what type of that rider is. Just an extra insight, really. So yeah, just don't forget as well, there's other areas to consider when we were talking about training plan prescription before. We were talking about how frequently to put certain things in a plan, when to allocate rest. So you also really need to take into consideration these other elements as well, so the training availability. If the athlete has returned from injury or sickness recently, or they currently are, that strategy to moving back to regular training should take priority at that time. And planning more individualized training around group rides. So if there's, the athlete wants to do, some people like to do structured training all the time, which is great. Some people are less sort of motivated by that, or some people might be doing group racing, so it makes sense to do some regular group rides as well. So you can put those in, but if you sort of put those in around a regular training strategy of those structured things to actively target, as long as you're actively targeting those things the majority of the time, you've got an effective training plan, and a well-motivated athlete if you're putting in some of those unstructured rides and workouts that they like as well. It's just finding a balance, really. And incorporating, there might be cross training that athlete might like to do as well, and also the goal event specific demands, which we haven't so much covered as yet. So if you have a zap of that QR code, there's another link to a blog in there, and that's where I go into much greater detail on how to basically event profile. So that's taking what the power demands of an event are and using that to form training target strategies, and that's a whole topic all of its own, really. So I'll give you an example of that. So combining all of those elements when forming custom plan, and the main differences between event and athlete specific approaches, it is down to a lot of those power demands of that event. Now you need a blend of both, really, for the most effective training plan. So we're not missing those holes and areas of physiology that need working on, but we're not leaving out those strengths either. But for example, so a 10-mile time trial requires constant pace above threshold a lot of the time. So a lot of the time you're going above FTP, so VO2 max is quite important there. However, if the athlete is already stronger in that area, then this type of effort is not needed to be prioritized as much compared to an athlete that is not as strong in those areas. So having said that, type of training should not be neglected, and strengths, of course, should always be trained, as we just covered. But if this is an area of strength, then the chances are there will be other areas that are compromised, such as stamina and sprint power, for example, in that time trial example that we just went through. So there's always a cost of benefit. So that's why the scales are there, because if you train one area, it kind of compromises another area, but some areas might benefit others. So like we were talking about with like improving your stamina can help to improve your FTP, improving your VO2 max can help to improve your FTP, improving your sprint and anaerobic can help to improve your VO2 max, and likewise your anaerobic can be a ceiling to your VO2 max development. But if you work one area too much, if you overly work that area, then you could severely compromise. So that's where that balance is, of finding the areas of prescription one to the other. And like I mentioned right at the start, it is complex, so there's no one answer. Like I said, yeah, I wish it was, and a lot of people want to believe it is, which, yeah, that's when you start to miss those areas. So yeah, in conclusion to all of this, so the balance to then strike is how much to work on with these physical limiters we've identified, which should be more in this case, than the physiological areas where another athlete is stronger, but also work on areas that are needed for the goal events. So that's, kind of snapshot the whole presentation. If there's one takeaway from that, more than anything else, it's that one. That's the simplified version of the complex bits that we've sort of just touched on, really. That's just the tip of the iceberg. so that pretty much concludes everything. Now you're welcome to put any comments in. If you've got any questions, I'll try my best to answer them. Also, I gave you some of the links there with the QR codes. So you can also contact me via the website there. Also, as well, the charts, some of the charts that I covered there, you can use that QR code there. That will take you to a page on the CBD Cycling website where that is all the current WKO charts that I'm using. So you can download as many of those as you like. There's some that I haven't covered in the presentation that are in there. So you can use a couple of those. You could use all of them. You could use half of those. Some of the default WKO ones, you could use ones that you've created yourself, and you could blend them all to find what works best for you. So yeah, if you've got any questions, yeah, contact me with that. And yeah, all that's left to say is thanks very much for your time, and hope to speak to you, some of you soon. Cheers then, thanks, bye.